Friends, thank you for being here today. What if I told you that beneath the windswept tundra of northern Manitoba lies a geological formation so revolutionary that it could render every oil well, every coal mine, and every natural gas pipeline on Earth as obsolete as steam engines? And what if I told you that this discovery, confirmed by Canadian geological surveys just 6 months ago and kept classified until 3 weeks ago, contains enough clean energy to power human civilization for the next 5,000 years, while producing zero emissions, zero waste, and zero geopolitical complications? This is not how energy revolutions announce themselves in the modern world. The discovery was accidental, a byproduct of routine geological surveys conducted by Natural Resources Canada in preparation for potential mining operations near Thompson, Manitoba. Core samples taken from depths of 3 kilometers revealed something that had never been observed in nature: naturally occurring metallic hydrogen formations trapped in ancient crystalline structures that had been preserved under permafrost for millions of years. Most of the scientific community initially dismissed the findings as measurement errors or contaminated samples. Metallic hydrogen had been theorized since 1935, but never successfully created in laboratory conditions, despite decades of research and billions of dollars in investment. The idea that it existed naturally in extractable quantities seemed impossible. 3 independent confirmations later, the impossible had become inevitable. I have studied the classified reports, the seismic surveys that map the extent of these formations, and the early extraction trials that have already begun in remote northern locations. What I discovered is a resource so abundant and so strategically powerful that it will end the fossil fuel age within a decade, while transforming Canada into the world's dominant energy superpower. The world thinks this is about alternative energy development. They are measuring the wrong transformation. Metallic hydrogen represents the ultimate energy storage medium. A single kilogram contains more energy than 100,000 liters of gasoline, can be stored indefinitely without degradation, produces only water vapor when converted to energy, and releases no greenhouse gases or radioactive waste. The energy density is so extraordinary that a transportation container the size of a shipping container could power New York City for a month. But what makes the Manitoba discovery truly revolutionary is not just the quantity of metallic hydrogen, estimated at over 50 million tons distributed across underground formations covering 15,000 square kilometers, but the unique geological conditions that make extraction economically viable using existing technology. The formations are relatively shallow, accessible through conventional drilling techniques modified for extreme cold conditions. The crystalline structures that preserve the metallic hydrogen can be fractured using controlled thermal processes that release the hydrogen while maintaining its metallic properties during extraction. The entire process requires no exotic materials, no dangerous chemicals, and produces no toxic byproducts. Canadian extraction teams have already demonstrated pilot production at rates that could supply global energy demand from a single facility occupying less than 1 square kilometer of Manitoba wilderness. The implications are mathematically staggering and strategically decisive. The first commercial extraction facility, currently under construction 50 kilometers northeast of Thompson, will be capable of producing metallic hydrogen equivalent to the energy output of 200 million barrels of oil annually. The facility employs fewer than 300 people, operates continuously regardless of weather conditions, and produces energy at costs approximately 90% lower than the cheapest fossil fuel alternatives. The economic implications are catastrophic for every nation whose economy depends on fossil fuel exports. Saudi Arabia's oil revenues, which represent 70% of government income, would become worthless overnight once metallic hydrogen energy systems achieve commercial deployment. Russia's natural gas exports to Europe, the foundation of Russian geopolitical leverage, would lose all strategic value when European nations could purchase Canadian metallic hydrogen at 1/10 the cost. The transformation timeline is shorter than most observers realize because metallic hydrogen energy systems integrate seamlessly with existing infrastructure. Current power plants can be retrofitted to use metallic hydrogen fuel in 6 months. Transportation systems can convert from fossil fuels to hydrogen-powered engines using technology that already exists. Heating systems can switch to metallic hydrogen with modifications that cost less than traditional fuel for 1 year. The network effects accelerate adoption exponentially. Countries that convert to Canadian metallic hydrogen gain immediate economic advantages over competitors using fossil fuels. Industries powered by metallic hydrogen can produce goods at costs that make fossil fuel competitors unviable. Transportation systems using metallic hydrogen operate at efficiencies that traditional fuels cannot match. International energy companies recognize the implications within weeks of the Canadian announcement. According to early indicators from industry sources, major oil corporations began emergency strategy sessions to assess their exposure to what internal documents reportedly describe as an extinction-level event for fossil fuel markets. ExxonMobil, Shell, and BP collectively saw their market valuations decline by over 40% in the month, following confirmation of Canadian metallic hydrogen extraction capabilities. Saudi Aramco's planned public offerings were postponed indefinitely as investors recognized that oil assets could become stranded within 5 years. The cascade effects extended beyond energy markets to encompass every industry that depends on fossil fuel economics. Airlines began negotiations with Canadian suppliers for hydrogen-powered aircraft engines that could operate at costs 80% lower than jet fuel alternatives. Shipping companies initiated discussions about converting their fleets to metallic hydrogen systems that would eliminate fuel costs as a significant operating expense. The shipping industry transformation accelerated when Maersk announced a partnership with Canadian metallic hydrogen suppliers to retrofit their entire container fleet within 2 years. The competitive advantage was immediate and overwhelming. Ships powered by metallic hydrogen could operate trans-Pacific routes at costs that made competitors using traditional marine diesel economically unviable. International steel production faced similar transformation pressures. ArcelorMittal began converting their largest facilities to metallic hydrogen-powered systems after pilot projects demonstrated that steel could be produced at costs 60% lower than coal-powered alternatives while achieving zero carbon emissions. The combination of cost advantages and environmental compliance made metallic hydrogen adoption inevitable for any steel producer seeking to remain competitive. The automotive industry recognized that metallic hydrogen represented the end of the electric vehicle transition before it could be completed. Ford and General Motors quietly began developing hydrogen-powered vehicle platforms that could provide range and performance capabilities that lithium battery systems could never achieve. Metallic hydrogen vehicles could travel 2,000 kilometers without refueling while carrying the same cargo loads as traditional internal combustion vehicles. Chemical industry transformation followed immediately as companies recognized that metallic hydrogen provided both energy and chemical feedstock advantages that petroleum products could not match. BASF initiated discussions with Canadian suppliers about establishing North American production facilities that would use metallic hydrogen for both energy and raw material inputs, creating integrated chemical production systems that traditional oil-based facilities could not replicate. The agricultural implications were equally revolutionary. John Deere began developing metallic hydrogen-powered farming equipment that could operate continuously during planting and harvesting seasons without the fuel logistics that limited traditional agricultural machinery. Fertilizer production facilities could use metallic hydrogen to create nitrogen compounds at costs that made petroleum-based fertilizers obsolete. The geopolitical implications are even more dramatic than the economic ones. For the past century, global power structures have been organized around control of oil resources and oil transportation routes. Nations like Saudi Arabia, Russia, Iran, and Venezuela have leveraged energy exports to gain international influence far beyond what their populations or economic diversification would otherwise justify. Canadian control of metallic hydrogen supplies would eliminate the geopolitical leverage that oil-producing nations have exercised for decades. Countries that have built their entire foreign policies around energy exports would find themselves without the resources needed to maintain international influence or domestic political stability. The American response revealed the extent of Washington's strategic concerns. Within 2 weeks of learning about Canadian metallic hydrogen capabilities, according to unconfirmed reports from diplomatic sources, the State Department began urgent consultations about ensuring American access to Canadian energy supplies. The discussions reportedly focused on technology sharing agreements, joint development projects, and long-term supply contracts that would prevent American energy security from becoming dependent on Canadian policy decisions. American officials recognized that metallic hydrogen represents a strategic resource more important than oil had ever been. Chinese officials began similar consultations, offering unprecedented technology transfers and market access agreements in exchange for guaranteed metallic hydrogen supplies. Beijing understood that Chinese manufacturing competitiveness would depend entirely on access to energy sources that cost 1/10 of traditional alternatives. European Union representatives initiated the most comprehensive negotiations, proposing a transatlantic energy partnership that would integrate Canadian metallic hydrogen into European energy security frameworks while providing technology sharing and investment guarantees that had never been offered to non-European nations. The competitive bidding for Canadian energy partnership revealed how completely metallic hydrogen had transformed international power relationships. Instead of Canada seeking partnerships with larger powers, the largest economies in the world were competing for Canadian cooperation on terms that Canada would set. Canadian officials have approached these negotiations with strategic patience that reflects their understanding of the leverage that metallic hydrogen provides. Instead of simply selling raw materials to other nations for processing and distribution, Canada has developed integrated supply chains that maintain Canadian control over every aspect of metallic hydrogen energy systems. Canadian companies would extract the metallic hydrogen. Canadian engineers would design the energy conversion systems. Canadian manufacturers would produce the equipment. And Canadian technicians would operate the installations. This approach ensures that other nations remain dependent on Canadian expertise and Canadian supply chains for their energy security. The strategy prevents other countries from developing independent metallic hydrogen capabilities, while ensuring that Canadian energy dominance becomes more valuable over time rather than being commoditized through international competition. The environmental implications provide additional leverage for Canadian energy diplomacy. Metallic hydrogen energy systems produce no carbon emissions, no air pollution, and no environmental degradation during operation. Countries facing international pressure to reduce greenhouse gas emissions have no alternatives to Canadian energy systems if they want to maintain industrial competitiveness while meeting environmental commitments. International climate agreements that mandate carbon neutrality by 2050 effectively require access to Canadian metallic hydrogen for any nation that wants to maintain modern industrial capabilities. Environmental regulations become enforcement mechanisms for Canadian energy dominance rather than obstacles to economic development. The speed of international adoption has exceeded all projections because metallic hydrogen provides solutions to multiple problems simultaneously. Nations reduce their carbon emissions, improve their energy security, decrease their operating costs, and increase their industrial competitiveness through a single decision to adopt Canadian energy systems. The demonstration effects are accelerating global transformation beyond Canadian capacity to supply immediate demand. Countries that observe the competitive advantages achieved by early adopters of metallic hydrogen face the choice between accepting permanent economic disadvantage or competing for limited Canadian supply allocations. According to early indicators from Canadian energy production facilities, waiting lists for metallic hydrogen deliveries extend beyond 2030, despite rapid expansion of extraction capabilities. Countries that delay their conversion to Canadian energy systems face the possibility of exclusion from the new energy economy until the 2030s. The strategic implications extend beyond energy economics to encompass military and security considerations. Metallic hydrogen energy systems could revolutionize military capabilities by providing unlimited power for advanced weapons, surveillance systems, and transportation platforms without the logistical vulnerabilities associated with fossil fuel supply chains. Nations with access to Canadian metallic hydrogen would possess military capabilities that countries dependent on traditional fuels could not match. Canadian control of metallic hydrogen supplies would provide influence over global military balances that exceeds anything achieved through conventional arms exports or security partnerships. The transformation of international order is proceeding with mechanical inevitability as nations recognize that their economic competitiveness, environmental compliance, and security capabilities now depend on Canadian cooperation and Canadian energy supplies. Countries that had organized their foreign policies around oil relationships find themselves recalculating their international positions based on metallic hydrogen access. Traditional alliance structures become less relevant than energy partnership arrangements that determine economic survival in the post-fossil fuel era. The financial markets have begun repositioning for a world where Canadian energy dominance determines investment flows, currency valuations, and economic growth prospects. According to unconfirmed reports from international financial institutions, major investment banks have established Canadian energy divisions that manage portfolios based on metallic hydrogen supply chain access rather than traditional energy sector investments. Goldman Sachs reportedly allocated 40% of their energy investment portfolio toward Canadian metallic hydrogen infrastructure within 3 months of the discovery announcement. Morgan Stanley began advising clients to divest from fossil fuel assets while establishing positions in Canadian energy technology companies that could provide exposure to metallic hydrogen development. The London Stock Exchange created new trading categories specifically for metallic hydrogen-related securities after traditional energy sector classifications became inadequate for companies operating across the metallic hydrogen supply chain. The Toronto Stock Exchange expanded trading hours and established specialized clearing mechanisms to handle the unprecedented volume of international investment flowing toward Canadian energy companies. Pension funds representing over 50 million retirees began emergency reallocations away from oil and gas investments toward Canadian metallic hydrogen exposure after fiduciary analyses concluded that fossil fuel assets represented unacceptable long-term risks. The California Public Employees Retirement System announced the largest asset reallocation in its history, moving $180 billion from traditional energy investments to Canadian energy partnerships over 6 months. Insurance companies began refusing coverage for new fossil fuel infrastructure projects while offering premium rates for Canadian metallic hydrogen facilities that pose no environmental risks and no stranded asset exposure. Lloyd's of London established specialized underwriting divisions for metallic hydrogen operations after traditional energy risk models became obsolete. Currency traders have identified the Canadian dollar as the primary beneficiary of global energy transformation, with exchange rates reflecting Canada's emergence as the world's indispensable energy supplier. Sovereign wealth funds have begun shifting their asset allocations toward Canadian infrastructure and technology investments that provide exposure to metallic hydrogen development. The network effects of financial reallocation create self-reinforcing cycles that accelerate Canadian energy dominance. Investment flows toward Canadian energy development increase Canadian production capacity, which increases Canadian influence over global energy markets, which attracts additional investment toward Canadian energy infrastructure. The timeline for complete transformation of global energy systems is compressed by the mathematical advantages that metallic hydrogen provides over all alternatives. Once commercial adoption reaches critical mass, the economic logic becomes overwhelming for every remaining fossil fuel user to convert to Canadian energy systems as quickly as possible. Early indicators suggest that critical mass will be achieved within 3 years as major industrial economies complete their initial conversions and begin experiencing the competitive advantages that metallic hydrogen provides. The remaining conversion timeline depends primarily on Canadian production capacity rather than demand from international customers. The geopolitical consequences are already becoming visible as traditional energy powers recognize the permanence of their strategic obsolescence. Saudi officials have reportedly begun exploring economic diversification programs that assume oil revenues will disappear within the current decade. Russian energy companies have initiated discussions about converting their infrastructure to distribute Canadian metallic hydrogen rather than domestic fossil fuels. The internal political implications for oil-dependent regimes are accelerating beyond their capacity to manage through traditional methods. Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 diversification program, previously considered ambitious, has been redesignated as insufficient for national survival in a post-oil economy. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman reportedly convened emergency sessions with international consultants to develop economic transformation strategies that assume complete elimination of oil revenues by 2032. Russia faces even more complex challenges as metallic hydrogen undermines both their energy export capabilities and their geopolitical leverage over European energy security. According to early indicators from Moscow sources, Gazprom executives have begun negotiations with Canadian energy companies about licensing distribution rights for metallic hydrogen in European markets, effectively acknowledging that Russian energy independence is no longer sustainable. The Kremlin's foreign policy apparatus has reportedly initiated urgent discussions about maintaining international influence through non-energy mechanisms after recognizing that energy diplomacy will become obsolete within the current decade. Russian military planners are assessing how to maintain strategic capabilities without the energy export revenues that have funded military modernization programs for the past 2 decades. Iranian leadership faces the most immediate existential threat, as international sanctions have prevented them from developing alternative economic foundations, while metallic hydrogen eliminates the strategic importance of Persian Gulf energy resources. Revolutionary Guard economic enterprises that control significant portions of the Iranian economy depend entirely on oil revenues that could disappear before Iran can develop replacement income sources. Venezuelan and Iranian governments face the prospect of complete economic collapse as their oil-dependent economies lose access to international markets that have converted to Canadian energy systems. The political instability that follows economic collapse could reshape entire regions as energy-dependent regimes lose the resources needed to maintain political control. The demonstration that a single resource discovery can eliminate entire industries and transform global power structures within a decade has accelerated international competition for resource security and technological independence. Nations that had assumed their strategic advantages were permanent are recognizing the vulnerability of economic systems built on assumptions about resource scarcity and technological limitations. The Canadian metallic hydrogen discovery represents more than just a new energy source. It represents proof that geological resources combined with strategic development can create advantages so overwhelming that they reshape international order within periods measured in years rather than decades. Countries are studying Canadian resource development strategies while accelerating their own geological surveys in hopes of discovering comparable advantages in their own territories. The search for the next resource discovery that could duplicate Canadian success has become a priority for national security establishments worldwide. The most remarkable aspect of this transformation is how completely it has escaped broader public awareness. While global attention focused on traditional geopolitical conflicts and economic disruptions, Canada was quietly confirming and developing a resource discovery that makes traditional energy geopolitics obsolete. The countries that were supposed to dominate the 21st century through military power and population size have discovered that resource advantages developed through patient scientific research can provide capabilities that military forces and economic pressure cannot match or counter. Canada has demonstrated that in an era where technology can unlock previously inaccessible resources, geographic advantages combined with scientific capabilities can create strategic dominance that traditional measures of national power cannot predict or prevent. The 6 months that changed everything are already reshaping international relationships, economic systems, and environmental possibilities in ways that most observers have not yet recognized. The transformation requires no dramatic conflicts or institutional collapses, only the mathematical logic of superior alternatives displacing inferior systems through voluntary adoption. By the time the implications become obvious to everyone, Canadian energy dominance will be operating with the routine efficiency that makes revolutionary change appear normal to those who are not tracking the underlying shifts in resource availability and technological capability. The world thought this was about energy independence and environmental protection. It was actually about the emergence of resource-based superpower status that makes traditional forms of international influence optional rather than necessary. Most people still think this is about alternative energy development. The mathematics of metallic hydrogen extraction suggest they are measuring the wrong transformation entirely. According to early indicators from geological surveys, this discovery may represent only the beginning of resource advantages that patient scientific research can unlock from Canadian territory. History does not provide warnings about how quickly resource discoveries can end entire economic eras.